and welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be watching a video by Kyle Hill. It's been a while since I've done one by Kyle Hill, but I'm looking forward to it. I remember enjoying the last one I did. So this is what would happen if you put your hand in a particle accelerator. I am imagining some kind of immense trauma. Provided that the particle accelerator is on. Is it always on? I don't really know much about particle accelerators, shockingly enough. Before I get going, though, I did want to give a quick shout out to some channel members. So thanks to Pterodactylus. Thank you to Kyle. Oh, no, not Kyle. Kenny Black is who I was trying to say, but I was thinking Kyle Hill. Kenny Black, Pterodactylus, Seth Archibald, Bradley. Ooh, goodness, I'm going to say your name so wrong, Bradley. I'm sorry. Bradley Segelsk. Bradley Segelsk. Thank you so much. Tony Knight, Eric Shearer, and AK Arbiter. So thank you so much for being channel members. It really does help us out. If you would like to support the channel, you can hit that join button, or you can, it also helps to just leave a like, leave a comment, watch these videos. Those things are helpful. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you would like to see more stuff. We do post content every single day. Lots of different types of things. So music, comedy, science, history, all sorts of fun stuff. And now, speaking of science, let's find out what's going to happen if you put your hand in a particle accelerator.
Particle accelerators. Machines that use electromagnetic fields to speed up charged particles to near the speed of light are, at the limit, the largest and most complicated devices ever invented.
Okay.
Used for everything from probing the fabric of the universe to treating cancer, these machines are extraordinarily useful in their ability to control, direct, and study the smallest pieces of the universe.
I did not realize they were used for cancer stuff. I really just thought they were used for smashing atoms, honestly.
But, being so complex and powerful, particle accelerators also demand extreme care and caution. Things can go wrong. People have been hurt.
Oof.
In 1992, one such accident, born of human error and a critical lack of resources, answered the question, what would happen if you mistakenly put your hand in a particle accelerator? This is the true story of the accelerator accident in Hanoi, Vietnam.
Okay. I really just kind of thought that this was going to be more theoretical, but nope, this happened. Damn. Okay, so it's history and science.
The accident occurred here at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant.
Pulsed in a precise way, changing electromagnetic fields can bend the paths of and accelerate charged particles. The first circular particle accelerator, what came to be known as a cyclotron, operated on this basic principle.
That's
a
cool.
proton merry-go-round, as its inventor Ernest Lawrence called it.
Aw, that's cute.
Modern
Whimsical.
circular particle accelerators are far more complex than Lawrence's 1930 invention, which won him a Nobel Prize.
Damn,
But the
1930.
underlying idea of accelerating charged particles in circles to eventually smash them together and against objects revolutionized nuclear physics and has touched almost every branch of science, from the creation of artificial elements for physics to the irradiation of tumors for medicine.
Okay.
The real power of a particle accelerator, large or small, is not that it can move atomic elements quickly. It's that they can move particles as quickly as physically possible. Everybody knows science's most famous equation,
E
E equals
squared.
mc squared. Well, most people...
I knew it was E equals MC squared. I might have said M squared, but that's just because I was also listening to what Kyle was saying.
don't know is that this isn't the full equation.
Oh.
It's actually E squared equals m squared c to the fourth plus p squared c squared. This second factor captures the momentum of some object. In everyday life, we are free to ignore this variable because most objects you're familiar with don't move very fast at all relative to the speed of light, and therefore the vast majority of an object's energy can be suitably approximated simply by multiplying its mass by light speed. This is the equation that you know.
Great.
However, when an object does approach the speed of light, its momentum dominates its total energy, and this, combined with a speed of light that is equal in all reference frames, is where we get the universal speed limit, c. Einstein's full equation can be shown to depend on just how close
Oh God, a fucking proof. Look at this proof. was so bad at proofs in high school and also later in college. I'm just terrible at them. I just couldn't. I'm just like, can I just accept that it's true? Like, I can't.
Object's velocity, v, gets to the speed of light, c. But as v gets infinitely closer to c, this factor will approach infinity, which means infinite energy, which we know isn't possible. And so, nothing with mass can travel at or faster than the speed of light. High-energy particle accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider basically prove this. The LHC, the most complicated machine ever built, can accelerate particles to within just 3 meters per second of the speed of light, but no further. 99.999999% of the universal speed limit. A fantastic feat of engineering.
That's pretty good. There's so many, the number of wires in there gives me stress, not gonna lie. That's a lot of wires.
Today, there are an estimated 30,000 particle accelerators worldwide. About half of them are used to insert ions and transmute materials, useful for semiconductor production, and the other half are used in radiotherapy to the benefits of millions of patients, with the small remainder of accelerators used in research. In 1992, a small laboratory in Vietnam was conducting research using another derivative of the cyclotron, a so-called microtron, when a concatenation of design flaws and human error cost a scientist his hands. In the November of 1992,
That's what I thought.
the Hanoi Institute of Nuclear Physics was using one of its 2 microtrons. The aged accelerator, an experimental model originally built in 1970.
Oh, that looks rusted to hell. That looks not safe.
Was given to Vietnam and the HINP by the former Soviet Union. The machine in the facility it sat in was installed according to old measurements taken in the USSR. There were no Vietnamese language manuals or instructions provided.
Great.
The control panel for the microtron was entirely in Russian. No Russians worked at the institute.
So, and they didn't try to get somebody in there to help? They were just like, we'll figure it out from the pictures? This is not an IKEA cabinet, my friends.
The HINP's only working microtron was set up to fling electrons through guide tubes at tungsten and uranium targets, producing X-rays and neutrons, respectively. On the 17th of November, the day of the accident, the accelerator was directing electrons at the tungsten target, which would in turn produce a conical beam of X-rays inside of a wooden box that held a sample of gold ore to be irradiated. Typically, an experimental sample would be pushed into or out of the irradiation zone by puffs of compressed air. But on this particular afternoon, the facility director decided that since the first sample was to be changed in just an hour, he could do everything by hand. The first experiment went according to plan. The director and 2 assistants removed the first sample by hand and placed the second in the path of the X-rays that would scream out of the tungsten at the speed of light.
Oh my God.
All personnel left the concrete maze encasing the accelerator. Just outside the control room, however, the director asked an assistant to get him some soap to wash up with and, apparently, walked towards the sink in the courtyard. The assistant, passing by the control room on the way to the soap, told the operator that the experiment was ready and that the accelerator was ready to be switched on. What the assistant didn't know was that instead of going to use the sink, the director decided something was awry with the experimental setup and returned to the microtron without telling anyone.
Oh, that was dumb.
He placed his hands inside the wooden box and adjusted the gold sample 3 or so times over the course of a few minutes. His hands were less than a foot from the tungsten, which, unbeknownst to him, was emitting extremely energetic X-rays. At the same time, the assistant had retrieved the soap and arrived at the courtyard. The director wasn't there. She called his name several times and then ran to the accelerator room.
Oh God.
The door was open. She shouted again. Nothing. Her voice was apparently drowned out by the din of generators, air conditioners, and cooling systems. Fearing the worst, the assistant ran down to the control room to tell the operator to shut down the accelerator.
This is why we need walkie-talkies. It was 1992. They should have had walkie-talkies at the very, something.
Immediately. But by then, the director's hands, feeling nothing, had been unintended targets for 2 to 4 minutes. The worried assistant and operator turned off the machine and ran back to the accelerator. The door was still open. They found the director adjusting the experiment. He passed by them as if nothing had happened and walked to the courtyard to wash his hands. That's when he was told that the machine had been on for at least a few minutes while he was inside. The International Atomic Energy Agency's report describes that at this point, the director fell very silent.
Yeah,
walked to a room.
he would know, right? Because he's like, well, I'm done. Like, I'm cooked. Bad phrasing.
Room with a gamma spectrometer to check if the very atoms of his hands had been turned radioactive. The machine showed a well-defined energy peak of antimatter annihilations born of gamma neutron reactions in organic tissue. At this point, the director knew he had been irradiated, but not how badly.
God.
Over the next few hours, everyone at the HINP heard about the accident.
They didn't go to the hospital?
No one did anything.
What?
The director rode home on his motorcycle as usual. That night, his hands felt strange, but he chalked it up to his rheumatoid arthritis.
Why didn't he go to the hospital? Oh my God. And I'm reading this, like, his hands and face looked almost black, but he had no problems using his hands. And then 10 days, he kept doing his thing. They're going to read all of this, but I'm just like, oh my God.
After 8 days of inaction, his hands were turning gray, but they functioned normally, and an annual checkup 2 days later didn't raise any questions, despite the director telling his doctor that he had probably been irradiated. She recommended a dermatologist for a possible vitamin deficiency.
Oh my God.
The next day, his hands were much harder to ignore.
Oh my God.
They were swollen and painful. Still, the director continued to work as normal. It wasn't until 24 days after the incident, on the 11th of December, that he went to a specialized hospital.
Like, okay, oh my God, okay.
His hands were now deeply ulcerated and the tissue was dying. The anonymous director's treatment related to his irradiation would span the next 600 days.
Oh my God, okay, so we're gonna just pause it here for a second. It's like I was gonna pause, but I didn't want to pause on that image for too long. I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. Oh my God. I was saying, like, he should have definitely gone to the hospital right away. It's like, I might have gotten irradiated. I know that's a big deal. Should have known it's a big deal. He works with it. And by this time we are like, I mean, Marie Curie is already like, well, famous. And we know that her stuff, like, we can't even touch some of her stuff still. So it's like, but like, what would you do? Like, what do you do for like radiation like that? Like, is there anything that can be done for radiation poisoning like that? I feel like we don't have an answer for that. Like, that's not something we've solved, right?
How do you build a facility that protects you from radiation while having a machine that generates intense radiation at the heart of it? The most effective and deceptively simple design is a maze, like one you'd solve with a pen and paper, only with concrete. Outside of accelerators and large electromagnetic influences, charged particles and photons travel in straight lines. And one of the most efficient ways to put as much material between you and a beam of radiation is to put as much stuff as possible between you and the source. The hard 90-degree angles of a concrete maze both maximizes the amount of material between beams and bodies and makes it much harder for any surface reflections to travel very far.
Okay.
The HINP had a maze around its microtron as well, but notice that where the maze was placed was preventing radiation from leaking into the courtyard, and not the offices where the scientists worked for hours on end.
Oh.
The maze principle applies all the way down to the fibers and cables of a facility. Anything that connects a room full of radiation to the outside world, even a service duct, should be oriented in such a way to minimize the strength of escaping radiation. In this case, only allowing scattered radiation to escape instead of direct radiation. In Hanoi, at the time of the accident, cable and ventilation ducts passed through walls in straight lines, and the doors of the facility were parallel, without the recommended bends and lead traps to block X-rays. The most basic protection at a radiation facility, however, is the material surrounding an accelerator or source. Radiation, as particles and photons of any energy, will eventually stop after enough nanoscopic collisions inside of a material. So the denser the material, the better. How much of a material you need for a facility can be calculated using the so-called half-thickness, which is the depth of some material that will reduce the intensity of ionizing radiation to 1/2 its initial value. The half-thickness for concrete, with respect to different radioactive sources, can be as small as an inch, which is why it's used for shielding the world over.
Dang.
Steel, lead, and uranium are even more effective, but more expensive. The
Still,
MT-17
concrete.
microtron, shipped from the Soviet Union and built in Hanoi without any Vietnamese language instructions, was placed in a facility with concrete walls of, quote, unspecified density.
Oh, good.
No other details were available.
So everyone
It was
in
later
this
calculated.
So the director's really boned, but everybody else in this facility who works here is boned too, is what I'm understanding from this.
The radiation dose rate for those working every day in the HINP's microtron control room, which was never measured to check shielding efficacy, was 5 times higher than the ambient levels in the ghost city of Pripyat, 2 miles outside of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant.
Wow.
And on the roof of the institute, this dose rate was 150 times higher than that. The news at
boned.
Vietnam's Center for Burns wasn't good. Later investigation by the IAEA would find that the dose rates where the director's hands were placed were extremely high. 20 to 50 grays, depending on exactly how long his hands were adjusting the experiment, which he couldn't remember. A whole body dose of 5 or more grays is fatal. Thankfully, because of the directionality of radiation, the director's whole body dose was minimal,
Okay.
but his hands were doomed from the start.
Yeah.
The progression was typical for acute radiation injuries, forever festering wounds that defy treatment and refuse to heal.
God damn.
They would get better, then much worse. Within a
my
few
God.
weeks, it was clear drastic measures had to be taken.
Yeah, what's he gonna do?
3 skin grafts were attempted from January through February. 2 of them failed. In March, an
Oh my
IAEA physician recommended removing the most damaged finger. It
Oh
was
my
amputated
God.
on the 23rd of March, 1993, and sent to a biophysics lab in Moscow for study. A grisly decision, but very useful. You don't often get an irradiated human body part to research. 159
No, you
days
don't.
after the incident, the director was moved to a hospital in Paris. In May, another finger was removed,
Oh,
and the right hand was surgically embedded in the director's own abdomen with the hopes of preventing infection and encouraging tissue growth.
Wait, whoa, I'm sorry. They did what? They took his hand and put it in his abdomen. They put it inside. What? People, that's a thing. Oh my God, I never heard of anything like that happening. I've heard of people like cutting giant, like big holes in stomachs and stuff because like they can't, or like putting. This one is not going to be for everybody.
On day 190, the right hand was removed from this natural pocket. The left hand improved. The right never did.
Ugh.
The director's right hand was amputated at wrist level on July 9th, 1993. At this point, the director's left hand appeared to be on the mend, but as is the sinister nature of radiation injuries, the damage isn't skin deep. In October, necrosis returned to the 4th and 5th fingers on his remaining hand. By the 443rd day after exposure, both damaged fingers had been removed. All that could have been saved of the director's hands, which wasn't very much, had been. He was finally discharged after moving in and out of hospitals for almost 600 days.
Shit.
The accelerator incident in Hanoi is overshadowed in nuclear history by the most famous accident of the same type, when Anatoly Burgoski accidentally placed his head in a particle beam. It's mostly famous for what didn't happen. Anatoly survived.
Damn.
It begs the question, Why didn't Anatoly lose his head when the director in Hanoi lost most of his hands?
He has this
I believe
much
it has
left.
something to do with what is known as the Bragg peak of different kinds of radiation. Protons, electrons, photons, and other particles each have their own interactions with matter. As such, each deposits its energy along the path of travel differently. Anatoly Burgoski's head encountered a proton beam, which deposits the majority of its energy more than 20 centimeters into human-like tissue. Since 20 centimeters is longer than most human heads are deep, the majority of the energy that hit Anatoly did not stop in his brain. If it had, he would have died instantly.
Shit. Well, that's better than like, I don't know. I feel like I'd rather die instantly, no matter what, than go through any amount of pain. Like, if I die, if ever so I die, I do want it to be instantaneous. I do not want to know what's coming. I do not. I just it wanted to here 1 minute, gone the next. That is what I want.
Hanoi director's hands encountered an X-ray beam comprised of photons. These deposit the majority of their energy very quickly before moving through much tissue. The depth of an average hand is within this peak, and therefore, the intense energy of the microtron in Hanoi did not peacefully pass through. It fatally irradiated most of the tissue it touched. This was later confirmed by an IAEA member visiting Vietnam after they placed a fresh chicken leg in the path of the same beam and checked it for antimatter annihilations.
Okay. Yikes.
It was the opinion of the International Atomic Energy Agency that the accident
How did he accidentally put his head in that thing, the other guy? How do you, like, I don't know. I mean, all right.
Vietnam was bound to happen. The developing country, owing to a serious lack of resources, did not have established radiation protection infrastructure. There were no trained inspectors to tour facilities. The Hanoi facility was built based on foreign language instructions from the Soviet Union. There was no radiation monitoring equipment to tell personnel that, when the machine was on, they were receiving a dose higher than walking around
That's
Chernobyl.
crazy.
There were only
Were they
handwritten
okay?
manuals for equipment and nothing for radiation protection procedures. Irradiation times for the microtron had no automatic cutoffs and were instead timed by wristwatch. Staff relied on word of mouth that no one was in the accelerator room before the machine was switched on. The list of faults can and does go on.
Yeah, Jesus.
Quote, the standard of radiation safety at HIMP before the accident was so low that an accident was not unlikely. After IAEA intervention, the HIMP fitted a magnetic interlock and padlock to the accelerator room door. An alarm near the microtron that the control room could sound was installed. Other buttons and lights inside and outside the accelerator room were added and integrated as there was, quote, a fundamental need to inculcate a sense of responsibility for safety, a safety culture in all concerned, end quote.
I seriously though, what happened to like all the other scientists? Because it sounds like they were also being like heavily irradiated constantly. So like what happened to them?
Vietnam, by the IAEA's estimation, had prioritized meeting the immediate needs of the country that nuclear physics and research can provide, not nuclear safety. The engineers and scientists at the Hanoi Institute of Nuclear Physics had the highest academic qualifications possible, but they did not have the training, resources, or regulatory oversight to prevent one of the worst particle accelerator accidents in history. As is so often the case in these stories, it wasn't an intrinsic feature of nuclear physics or engineering that caused human harm. No, it was all too human behavior.
Yeah.
Guessing the positions of personnel, wanting to change an experiment by hand to save time, assuming that if you can't feel something, nothing is happening.
Oof.
In the summer of 1994, after losing the majority of his hands, the anonymous facility director returned to Hanoi. Until next time.
Okay. So so his name has been, for his safety, I assume. But what happened to the rest of them? Like, because it really does sound like that was all, like, it sounds like that was bad for everybody. Like, it sounds like that was really terrible for all involved. So God, Ugh. My, ugh, the poor guy. All right. Well, that was way more disturbing than I thought it was going to be. Um, Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.